All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us at the Scratch Conference for this panel on AI ethics and creative learning, possibilities and pitfalls. As you can see from the image here, this is a complex topic. Generative AI is made up of little green goblins in the cloud and robots. Just kidding, that's an AI-generated image. But the larger point being, there's a lot of both excitement and confusion and concerns around where AI and generative AI might fit into the world of creative learning as exemplified by Scratch and beyond. So we've gathered an amazing group of panelists today to discuss that. They can introduce themselves when they present, but we have Ariam Mogos, James Dick, Grishma Chadha, and Kareem Edward. And I am Eric Rosenbaum, Director of Scratch Lab at the Scratch Foundation, to moderate today. I also want to thank our amazing ASL interpretation team for their work with us today. So before we get into the panelists, I wanted to give a little bit of framing. Then we'll have each of them present, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. So what are some of the new possibilities generative AI can bring to creative learning? I'm sure in our audience, we have lots of folks who've experimented with it and have ideas about this. The way I see it, it's a new way to help bring your imagination to life. You can, for instance, use it to, instead of just in Scratch drawing images or importing them, you can just describe what you want and AI will try to create that for you. You can also use AI to generate Scratch code. There's a screenshot showing that on this slide. Here I had a dinosaur sprite and I asked it to tell a joke and it said, what do you call a dinosaur that's sleeping? A dinosaur. The AI came up with that, pretty amazing. So it can lower the floor for creativity, make it easier to get started. It can widen the walls to help people explore more possibilities. It could become an accessibility tool that helps people express themselves in ways that they couldn't before due to some limitation. And I think that because AI, for better or worse, is becoming part of our world, literacy with AI, in other words, the ability to understand it and use it and empower kids with it, is incredibly important. And so we have to consider how AI can fit in creative learning. The flip side of the pitfalls is a complex area too. We won't go into the details of all these things, but I should just mention that because AI right now mostly is in the cloud, there are privacy concerns. There's content safety concerns, so it can create inappropriate or even harmful content. There are bias concerns. Those three little images are the pictures that I got when I typed in to an image generator computer programmer. You might notice they're all white men. That's a problem. We'll talk about that more. Hallucination is the problem with generative AI where it makes things up. I think it's intrinsic to large language models that they work that way. They make things up. And so we should know that going into using them. There's an example at the bottom right of this slide of a dog talking to a robot on a spaceship. It's a story generated with experimental blocks I created that allow you to make characters in Scratch that talk using generative AI. And in the story, they're running out of oxygen. Oh, I'm hearing some background noise for some reason. In the story, they're running out of oxygen and the dog says, woof, we're running out of air. And the robot replies, I suggest opening a window, which doesn't really reflect common sense. So hallucination takes many forms. Of course, right now, generative AI is expensive. That's a cost problem. That's changing. It's, for the most part, online only. And so not everyone has access to it. There are age limits to its use and issues with copyright, the ownership of the training data and so forth. So there's many complex pitfalls to talk about, but we'll get into that with the panelists. I wanted to just quickly share some pointers to resources, and you'll have access after the session to these slides. You can click through and see these three things. One is a lesson plan using our own Scratch Lab face sensing blocks that use AI to detect your face, so you can make interactive face filters. And we have a lesson plan that explores how to use those and also some of the ethical questions around AI that raises. There's an essay by Scratch founder Mitch Resnick about generative AI and creative learning, and a new resource that came out last week from teachai.org on guidance on the future of computer science education in the age of AI. So those are all worth a look. And now I'm going to hand it over to our first panelist, Ariam Mogos.
Thank you so much, Eric, and for that awesome overview. My name is Ariam Mogos. I work at the Stanford Design School, where I lead our emerging tech initiatives. And essentially, that's sort of thinking about what kind of course offerings could we provide to undergraduate and graduate students at the intersections of emerging tech like AI and design. And we also design resources for educators and young people in K-12 to help them sort of better think about these issues. And how to design around them. Boop. So I just want to kick off with what I think is really one of the most fun and joyful aspects of using generative AI to be creative. I teach an introductory seminar for freshmen and sophomores around AI and ethics. And in winter, we explored this generative AI, sort of this image generator, where students could train their own models by feeding it photos, feeding it data on top, and it works on top of stable diffusion. And I'm sorry I don't have a better photo of this, but one of my students, Seda, she participates in cheer at Stanford, and she really wanted to experiment with creating like a new cheer costume. And through using this image generator, there were just so many sort of accidents and misunderstandings because, you know, the tech is in development and it's also flawed. And it came up with some really like wacky and wild concepts, everything from like just the color schemes and the patterns and the shape and the fabric. And I think that those sort of happy accidents can really expand the way that we think and the possibilities, and uh, just help us come up with ideas that we never would have before. And I think there's something really special about that when it comes to generative AI. So I just wanted to sort of highlight that because I think it's sometimes something that can be overlooked, and I think it's a really exciting aspect of the technology. Boop. So, of course, one of the really big concerns around generative AI is bias and representation. Unfortunately, these tools are recreating and sort of amplifying real world structural inequities. And I think that has a lot of real impacts on how students see themselves in the tools and how they use them. And some of my colleagues here on the panel are going to talk sort of more in depth about that. But at the D School, we've really been thinking about how do we help young people understand these dynamics so that they feel empowered when using these tools and designing with them. Boop. So over the last few years, we started this project in 2020. We've been working on Rep, which is an analog magazine that helps young people and educators sort of better understand emerging technologies like AI and how to design with them. Boop. And it's in an analog format that was really intentional because we wanted, it was also sort of, this project was started during COVID, and we really wanted young people to sort of be able to get hands-on with tech in as many sort of accessible formats as possible. And really, this project helps them sort of explore a wide range of issues related to AI through essentially project-based activities, case studies, and art remixes. Boop. Thank you. And one of the issues, some of those issues, one of them that I think is really important is sort of how do we think about data sets that power AI and other technologies, and how do we reckon with the fact that they are designed, that we can design them to be more equitable and to be more representative, so that we could sort of try to curb harmful bias. Boop. Another key element in this work for us is how do we support young people to learn how to prototype with AI and different types of data sets in a low fidelity way that really allows them to experiment. Boop. And not just experiment with what they're making, but also experimenting with and understanding the implications of what they're making and the consequences of those design decisions on different communities and even the natural world. Boop. And so I want to just really close with a question that I have and a curiosity, is sort of around the consequences for craft. This is definitely not, I'm not trying to make a bold statement around this, but what I want to surface is, and I guess I'll use a personal example. When I was younger, when I was a teen, I used to make a lot, with editing software and music software. I really loved making films and making music. And I learned so much from the sort of tedious and frustrating aspects of film editing and music editing. I learned so much about storytelling and composition. And I wonder, with the way that these generative tools, are kind of doing that hard labor and hard work for us, what gets lost in terms of what we learn about craft? And I don't know. This is just a question that I have, but there's definitely a concern there, because I think that, like, that struggle, that productive struggle, really helps us shape our perspective, and our view in the world of how we make and how we build. So I just think it's something important to think about. Um, and then I will pass it over to, I think, James. Cool.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks so much, Ariam. Hi, I'm James Deck. I'm the Director of Innovation at the Franklin School in Jersey City, New Jersey. We're a pretty new high school, and I teach the design and technology courses, as well as run our makerspace programs there. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. So here you can see on the left, there's some computer code, some JavaScript written using the P5 library, as well as a video game that's running on the right side. This is code that was written by ChatGPT in collaboration with one of my students in a creative applications of AI class. And in this class, it was kind of like I describe it like an art class that experiments with using generative AI tools. Students were making illustrated stories and music. And towards the end of the year, we had this unit on collaborating with AI to create video games. And so the students worked iteratively with LLMs over the course of a few weeks to develop recreations of classic video games. And what I found was that students were actually able to start diving into some of the more abstract concepts around using things like functions and object-oriented programming pretty quickly, because they, while ChatGPT wrote the code, the students felt some ownership over it still, because they were describing what they wanted it to do and tweaking it. And really, they were able to develop some understanding of these concepts and show me that that they really understood what the code was doing, even though they were beginner coders. And they were able to demonstrate that they could make changes to the code in like a live coding situation. So next slide. So this is my neighbor, Marilyn. She's 74 years old. And at a party about a year ago, I showed her ChatGPT, and she just really fell in love with the tool. And she's been using it to generate poetry ever since. And she's experimenting with all these different ways to do this. So recently she told me a story about how she was going for a walk in a graveyard across the street from her house, and she saw some firemen that were laying flags down in honor of some of their lost members. And so right there, she put in this prompt into ChatGPT on her phone and had the large language model generate this poem. And then she was just going to walk away, but she decided to actually approach the firemen and have them and show them the poem. And one of the firemen volunteered to read the poem out loud. And she described the story about how there were tears in their eyes. And I was just really struck about how this really opens up a new audience to working with creative applications of technology. And this is a woman that doesn't really have too much experience working with creative technology tools, but here she was, really generating something that was meaningful to her and meaningful to these firemen. I think that, tools like Scratch and processing and P5, they really widen the walls and invite visual artists to become coders. And I'm wondering about if some of these generative AI tools that use text as output might invite a more diverse audience into working with creative technology or coding. So perhaps we'll start to see some interfaces for programmatic interfaces for working with language arts. So next slide. Okay, so we're about to watch a short video where this is actually part of a documentation that one of my high school students made for a project where he wanted to make a drone that is controlled by a glove. So he came to me, he didn't have any experience working with electronics or programming. And as his teacher, I didn't really have the technical background to do a drone project. I've never built a drone. I don't have a lot of knowledge in that area. But he was able to use ChatGPT as sort of a project coach to help him through this. And so we can show this short video.
This stage of the process taught me my second valuable lesson. Before blaming the hardware, blame yourself. In other words, when I had a problem, it's probably something that I did wrong that's the issue, rather than the technology itself. Since I'd been struggling with the radio so much, I eventually started to think that the radio just didn't work with my drone, rather than there being something inherently wrong with what I was doing. But instead of just letting me buy a whole new radio, my tech teacher pushed me to keep trying. And he was right. I had done something wrong with the wiring, and eventually, after literal months of troubleshooting, I finally got it working.
Look at that. It's working. It's actually getting the, oh my God, finally. You know what? I'm doing a victory lap. I don't care. Woo! Victory lap. Victory lap. Woohoo!
So what the student didn't describe there in the video is that this sometimes working with ChatGPT as a project coach actually backfired, and he was over relying on the tool and really trusting the advice of this LLM. So Eric mentioned the hallucinations, and at times this ChatGPT actually led him to believe that his hardware was broken when really he needed to spend some more time reading through the actual documentation of his hardware and closely following some actual tutorials instead of just trusting ChatGPT. We can move on to the next slide.
This stage of the process taught me.
Yeah, thank you. So this is just at the end of the school year this year. So he did actually finish this project, and he made a glove-controlled drone, which is really an amazing project, technically very challenging. And I wouldn't have been able to support this student on my own to do this project, but with the help of ChatGPT and me helping kind of on the side, coaching him, he was able to actually complete this project. So I do see like generative AI is having the potential to really help students complete projects with a higher level of complexity than they normally would. Final slide here. So some worries that I have about this are like, you could see when that student had that sort of aha moment, how excited he was. But if we've got intelligence on tap, like a utility or something, well, students have less of these hard fun and hard won moments. They're going to have less hard won aha moments. And well, students become jaded towards the wonder and whimsy of creative learning. So how can we really harness the power of generative AI to assist students with creative projects, but also preserve that joy and satisfaction of the fruits of hard work? So hopefully we can talk about that in the questions, and I'm going to pass it off to Karishma.
Thank you, James. Hi, everyone. It's so great to be here with you. I'm Karishma. I am a graduate student researcher at the Lifelong Kindergarten Group at the MIT Media Lab, and a former member of the Scratch team. So I'm very excited to be sharing some things that I'm exploring related to generative AI with you today. Next slide, please. So I wanted to give a little bit of background, but you all probably know about Scratch, given that you're here at the Scratch conference today. So I work at the Lifelong Kindergarten group, where we explore creating creative tools and fostering communities around creative learning. And I'm constantly inspired by the way that young people express themselves on Scratch and in the online community. Next slide, please. And in particular, I am very inspired by the way that young people share aspects of their personal identities and cultures through About Me projects or dress-up games or icon creators or games. And that's the focus of some of my more recent research, where, if you could go on to the next slide, I'm exploring how we can use this new technology, generative AI, that is very hyped up right now. I'm exploring how we can use it for personal expression and how we can design new experiences with generative AI that support young people in expressing aspects of their identities and their personal lives and create personally meaningful content. So next slide, please. So I set out to try this technology for myself. I wanted to create a digital avatar of myself and representing some of my interests. And unfortunately, I was very disappointed by the first sets of results that I got. So this top row of images is a set of images that I got from DALL-E 2, where I was typing in a prompt about creating a digital avatar of a South Asian girl who likes to make art projects. And unfortunately, the results that I got felt caricaturish and stereotyping, and some just downright scary looking. And while the results in the bottom row, which were generated by Midjourney, feature a lot more rich detail, I was disappointed that all of these illustrations look like exactly the same person, with idealized beauty standards such as tiny waists or heavy makeup. And I didn't feel comfortable with this technology and sort of seeing how it sees me. And so I'm interested in creating a new experience with generative AI that actually nurtures young people in exploring and expressing aspects of their identity. So if you could go on to the next slide. So I've been creating a tool that I call Imagine Yourself, which is inside of Scratch. You can use AI to create sprite costumes or backdrops. And I was particularly interested in making it an iterative process. So you can kind of regenerate images and look behind the scenes to see how was your prompt transformed by the system and edit that prompt. So here I'm making an avatar of myself and incrementally changing parts of it to make it look more like what I want to be in my project. And then there's also some examples of it's not quite going in the direction that I want. So I'm trying to approximate like my skin tone. And I used like the fact that I'm from North India. I'm from, my family is from Punjab. And ultimately you can choose a character that you like and bring it to life inside of Scratch. The video will be over in a few seconds. Yeah, so you can bring your creations to life within Scratch. And so I have been very excited to try out this new tool that I've been building with young people and adults, it primarily in computer clubhouses. And I've been very excited to see the variety of ways that young people are using it to express themselves. Here are a few examples of things that people have created so far. And I wanted to highlight one example in particular. So if you could go into the next slide. Here, someone who participated in one of my workshops was sharing the ways that she was exploring creating a character that looked like her. And she talks about some of the challenges of representing her skin tone as an interracial woman. And she said that when she types in Black woman, it automatically was giving her dark skin tones. And when she tried to change aspects, when she tried to change it to include light skin tone, it kind of started making other features of the character more white, such as like straight hair, and changing like the facial features. And so she was expressing the challenge that she was having in representing herself, but she was also sharing the delight that she had in trying the same prompt several times and seeing multiple depictions of the same character that she's describing. So in particular, she was really excited to see that she saw this character as a superhero or a knight in shining armor or a doctor or a chef. And so I appreciated this example and wanted to bring it up because I think it highlights the two-sided coin of possibilities to create what you imagine or what you didn't imagine. But also there's the flip side of that, where these generative AI relies on stereotype, and it amplifies human bias in the way that these models have been trained and brought into the world. And so I'm exploring whether there are ways to kind of design around those challenges and looking at what are young people's actual experiences with creating with these tools. And then I wanted to leave you all with some open questions. And I am primarily focused on design. And so the questions that I've been thinking about are, how can we design AI tools and experiences that nurture young people as creators? And particularly, how can we design experiences that nurture young people's imaginations of themselves and foster a sense of belonging in creation, in self-expression, in computing, particularly as these tools can be alienating for people of marginalized backgrounds or people that are underrepresented in computing and media. And so I hope we get to discuss some of these questions. And with that, I will pass it off to Kareem.
Peace and good morning. How's everyone doing? My name is Dr. Kareem Edward, and I want to share a little bit about the work that we do at the ILLIS Lab. Next slide. So, as my background, I'm a learning scientist, and I also focus on STEM education directly and particularly for Black children. The work that I do in West Philadelphia, which is in the area we work in, is designated as a promised neighborhood, is really to figure out how to get a direct connection between computational making, literacy skills, and then career pathway. Also, being the co-director of the ILLIS Lab, which stands for Informal Learning, Linking Engineering, Science, and Technology, is really a way of figuring out how to do culturally sustaining practices. In the lab, we do sneaker material design work. We do modular manufacturing with sneakers. We have an animation lab, which is directly connected to the fact that I'm also a television producer. So part of the work I do in Work It Out Wombats is linking not only computational literacy for early childhood development, but also thinking about how this early exposure to the work around computational literacy helps young people project themselves and see themselves within these STEM spaces. But today I want to have a very direct and clear conversation about my work around Black children, particularly Black boys, when they're engaging in and using AI generative software for their co-creative projects. Next slide. So to kind of frame it, we engage in a pilot study. I was sharing some of my work with my high school students and just kind of the creative artwork that I do on the show. And one of the things I expressed is that as a Black male working in the industry, for many of my production meetings, I'm the only one there. And for my students, they were expressing how they wanted to be able to create, design, and be part of the creative spaces. And for many of the barriers that they have is just trying to kind of snap into an idea that's trapped in here and get it on page or get it on to the screen. So I shared a little bit of using particularly Midjourney as an opportunity to just kind of generate some images. So this led to a pilot study that we created. And today I particularly want to talk about Devante, who's a Black undergrad design student who was really struggling with using the image generator to really come up with some quick ideas for a game that he was designing. And what I wanted to give is direct language from his process and also share some of the work that came out of it, because it's very important, not only as we contextualize the discussion about AI bias, but then also to share the work and some of the struggles that our young people are having when they're using this software, particularly in creative spaces. Next slide. So particularly for Devante, what he was doing was twofold. Number one, he was doing some hand drawing work where he was just doing some quick sketches. And this is for his game design course, where he basically was trying to generate some characters that he would later 3D model. And as he would hand drawn some of the work on his iPad, he wanted to use Midjourney as an opportunity to kind of smooth out the edges and really kind of smooth out some of his rough work. So when he would put it into the system and then he would do the smoothing technique, this is what the output would come. It would always lighten up the skin tones of his character. So the focus of his character was to generate a superhero for his particular game. It would always smooth out and straighten out the hair. And every single time that he would put in his design, this was the output, and it became frustrating. So I want to give it some context though, because what we've been sharing today is a very individual kind of framework, but I wanted to give it as a group setting. So for his partners that were white and Asian, when they were putting in their artwork, they were getting the outputs that they wanted. The generator wasn't smoothing out the hair textures for these characters, and it wasn't lightening their skin. So for them, what they were getting as far as an output was what they were necessarily expecting, but then at the same time, they were able to move forward. Next slide. So then it became prompt time, right? So he figured, okay, let's try another way of inputting this just to kind of be real generative and move forward. So he typed in one Black male, glowing hair, so on and so forth, and this would be the outcome. And in the first picture, it just straight directly made almost a white character. And as you could see, again, the hair texture wasn't what he was looking for. As I was sharing with another researcher, part of the discourse that came out of it was that for many of the data sets that were being used, it felt like this software had an anime bias too. So we were thinking about it and looking at the eye shapes and looking at the facial shape, but that's also something else to consider when having this discourse of using these image generators, particularly for rapid co-creative ideation. Next slide. So this is some of the themes as the research for this pilot. This is some of the themes and just some of the supporting descriptions and quotes that came out of it. And one of the things that stood out to me was for Devonte using this work, he needed multiple entries. At one point, we counted 17 different prompt changes for him to remotely be able to get the skin tone that he was looking for. And many people would ask, well, why is that important? Well, when he would ask the system to change the color of the suit or change the sneakers to aqua shoes, it quickly made that change. But when when he was asking for skin tone so that way he could color match, because that's another thing too. As a design student, he wanted to see how the suits and all the different accoutrement that goes on with the suits looked with skin tone. It became very important, but he couldn't get the output that he was looking for. The other thing too is that he shared that for many of his friends, they were receiving setbacks, but he felt that particularly the system was making it very difficult for him. And this really slowed down his process. But he did see that there was a great opportunity with adjustments, with the right kind of training, which is what we're working on as far as the full study, is to see if there's a set of image sets and also data sets that will help support the creative part of it. And that's part of why I've entered into the AI group chat, as I would say, is that for me as a learning scientist and really thinking about cognitive process developing and then the intersection of race and culture, we're asking everyone to be a part of this new kind of progressive world in using AI. But there's a group of underrepresented, particularly Black people that are struggling. And they're struggling because of the biases that are the promises that are being shared with how AI is supposed to be supportive and be this co-creative opportunity, but yet it's still creating these it's reflecting these long-standing barriers that are now finding its way in the creative process. For my work centering around play, creativity, and imagination for Black students, it becomes very important that we continue to have these kind of conversations and then also show not only their own words, but then their own work to let everyone know that there's an opportunity to support everybody as we use these AI systems in the creative process. Thank you very much. I appreciate you all.
Wow. All right. First of all, thank you so much to our panelists for those presentations. Some really powerful ideas and questions and concerns to think through. We're getting some comments coming from the audience, and we have a little bit of time to discuss. But before we open that up, I thought I would address to each of the panelists a big question, which actually I think Kareem was also leaving with us just now. Broadly, where do we want this set of tools to go with respect to how we shape it to reduce the kind of harmful biases and other problems, and increase the empowerment that we see across all the populations of people, especially kids around the world, that we want to benefit from them. So what do we want to see? Where should generative AI fit in? And what changes would you like to see to it in the future? What should we be working on? And anybody want to jump in?
I'm happy to start. I'll just say, I think that, it really starts with who is actually designing the technology. Unfortunately, the technology industry is not diverse. And in some of the ways that it is diverse, I think there's a lot of tokenism, which is a huge problem. There's not, you don't see diversity at the management level or the leadership level, which is why we continue to see really harmful technology. I think for us, those of us educators in K-12, I think one place we can really start is, when it comes to STEM and STEAM, like, how do we make sure that we're also supporting students to think about inequities when they're using tech? I think that's a huge gap in the STEM and STEAM space, where students aren't really thinking about equity when they're designing and when they're building with technology. And I think that's a place where educators can play a big role so that at least our future technologies are more inclusive and equitable. So I think that's one place I'd love to see some shifts.
I think also making the platforms accessible where there are opportunities to make modifications. One of our panelists shared how the prompts, to be able to edit prompts and then be able to see some real-time outcomes really will support the creative process, right? So for my students, even though they were receiving some barriers as far as how they were using the tool, they did feel empowered that there was an opportunity for them to make the necessary adjustments. But the catch is this, is that for other students who didn't have to make those adjustments, they kept moving progressively through their process. So creating an opportunity where you could set up a profile where you're able to do some modifications even on the base level, so that way it can help support where you're going to progressively move forward. I think it's something that the industry should look at, particularly when looking at an art or using it within a creative art space.
I really like that vision of really customizable tools, which I think is what Karishma is especially working on. And I want to point to also the flip side there, which has to do with the power dynamics. The corporations that currently provide the state-of-the-art generative AI models have motivations and processes that are not totally transparent to the public. And so their aims tend to dominate in this situation. We can customize the output. We can do a process called fine-tuning that adds a final layer to the generation that can redirect it a little bit. But ultimately, corporations like OpenAI and Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Anthropic, they're building the tools that cost tens or hundreds of millions of dollars to create that we rely on for the state of the art right now, AI tools. And we need to hold them accountable to these concerns because there's only so much we can do on the front end, on that last stage. There is a movement towards open source AI, but even that has some power dynamics trouble and it's expensive. My hope is that will start to shift, that as we start to understand how to make these things, how to do the initial training of models more cheaply, there'll be more diversity in who's behind the creation of them, as Ariam was talking about, who's involved, who's the decision maker, and that it can reflect the concerns of more different populations, not just a kind of the corporate elite that's controlling it now.
I could build on that a little bit. So I have primarily been focusing on exploring how can we design around these limitations, or can we design around some of these pitfalls when we're presenting AI to young people, to our students. And so in my work, I was particularly focused on, is there a way that I, as a tool designer, can get the AI behind the scenes to generate more diverse output so that the young people, people of color, people with disabilities, people that are not often represented in pictures on the internet, can they do less work than they currently have to do to work around these limitations themselves? And there's a lot of challenges with kind of designing around these pitfalls, because the AI is like trained so well on this data set that no one has seen the entirety of, because it's billions and billions of images. But I think beyond that, particularly for educators who are working directly with young people, in all of the workshops that I've had, young people have been thinking critically about AI, even if they have not used it. They are hearing about it in the media. They are hearing about like the issues with environmental resources that these models take to train, the exploitation of marginalized communities, the copyright and theft of artists' work. So they're already thinking about all of these things and are concerned about them. And so I think it's our job as educators to be uplifting their voices and respecting how they feel about AI when we're designing like activities and things, and to help them bring that critical perspective to their work as creators, as learners. But yeah, it's going to be hard, but worthwhile.
Yeah, lots to think about here. And there's some questions coming in from the audience I wanted to address. Karishma mentioned the environmental concerns, and that also has come in from our audience as well. And I think that is, I didn't include that on my list of pitfalls at the start, but it certainly should be on there as something to be concerned about, and also to advocate for the companies that are controlling these things to do better, because I believe that they can. I wanted to bring up a question about generative AI and coding, because we're here at the Scratch conference, and there was a comment about the need for how this person wrote it. I really liked, to engineer the AI away from its native ignorance, which I thought was a really interesting way to phrase it. And I can certainly relate to that in trying to steer AI systems to get what you want. As some of our panelists talked about, there is a kind of whole literacy and skill of understanding what it can and can't do. And that relates to me to the larger framing that we use in an education context of how we present it to kids. So I'd love to hear comments from the panelists on that. What framing should we provide? What steering does it need, or other kind of framing we should give?
So I can start with this. So I think very often people think of AI as like a search engine or something, like you just type something in and you get the answer straight away. But I think, as all the panelists have shown, it really is, to get the best results, it is more like a conversation that you're having with this AI, and it's an iterative process. I know that somebody asked about what was the prompt that my student used to generate that video game. There was no one prompt, it was many prompts. And it was the student coming back with like a snippet of code and saying, okay, can you change the boss's behavior in this way? Or so it very much is a conversation, and not, just a one shot deal.
Other thoughts on the framing? How should we present this stuff to kids? What do they need to know about it?
I've been thinking a lot about iteration and agency. I want to know, how do kids feel while they're using AI to create something? Do they feel ownership over the thing that they have created? Do they feel proud and celebratory of their work? I really appreciated some of the video examples in James's presentation of the student doing the victory lap, but I appreciated that it was an example of them figuring out that they were relying on the technology or the AI too much, and there was kind of a different human process to go through of tinkering with what they have built. And yeah, I think it's hard to design for agency. And so one of the things that I've been thinking about is, like, what do the young people see of how the tool works? So in order to be able to tinker with something, you need to be able to see all of the materials you have in front of you, to be able to put things together and take them apart again. And a lot of these AI tools, as they exist off the shelf, are very black box. So everything is hidden behind the scenes. Your prompt gets revised by the system and you don't even know it. And so I'm trying to think of like, what are ways that we can unpack that either as tool designers or as educators when we're presenting the AI in the classroom, and giving examples of things that you can create with it or ways to interact with it, that is not just like prompt box output. Yeah.
So one thing for me in the work, again, I center the work around Black children and how they're engaging. They're very aware of bias within these spaces. In the CS space, they're very aware of it. There's really no intro that I have to have with my students. And that's from elementary all the way to high school. And what I try to do is that old adage of toolbox and not the tool, right? So I don't center AI in the work that we're doing. So in our animation lab, we use it as being an additive tool where we still, because we do stop motion, there's still a physicality, there still needs to be the storyboarding and whatnot, but we still sometimes may get some creative blocks. So making sure that young people understand a couple of things, right? That if you do use this tool and you have access to these tools, there's a very surface level interaction that you're going to have with it. And more importantly, whatever output you get, as you're going to apply it in this creative process that we have within the lab, understand that someone else fed the system, right? What you're looking to do is basically to have a sketch, and that's part of the work now that we're doing. So again, they understand the bias, but it's making sure that they understand that they do not control the input of what the actual, how the model was trained. So then they're going to get someone else's viewpoint, or another set of images or outputs that really already kind of massaged in the background. And when they understand that they just need a very quick sketch, then they're able to then use that moving forward. There's something that someone said in the chat that we actually are working on another project when it comes to music. So music actually provides more bias than the image. And we ran into that problem, right? So we currently, myself and a few other folks, we are using music, particularly when you see the Drake and Kendrick Lamar situation that's been taking place throughout the summer. There was a lot of AI engagement that was being used. But part of why our students were very entertained and thinking about using music and AI, what they were finding when they were using the sound generators to try to make some beats, there was a very large preference to certain Western instruments and Western stylings and beat syncopation, so on and so forth. So there was a lot of work within the music space that they were finding that they had to do, is because of how the models were being trained. So again, I come back to this. My students understand that in their creative STEM work, project-based activities, bias is there. So now what they have to think about it is a tool, right? And not the toolbox. And then from that point, they're able to then figure out how they use these tools, or this particular tool, to then help them move forward as far as their creative outputs.
I love that, Kareem. I totally agree. Really interesting observation about the bias in music generation. I found the same. So this type of bias exists across all the media that AI is touching now: music and sound, text generation, images and code. And I totally agree with your framing also, that we should present this generative AI as one tool of many, as part of a toolkit, and to try to understand its limitations and where its role is among other tools, where you can have more control of it. I also really liked what Ariam mentioned in her presentation about the questions about craft and the role of happy accidents, because I think while generative AI does have these many limitations, it also produces things, because of its slightly chaotic nature, that can be interesting as identified by the person. So you tend in generative AI to generate lots of things and then notice what comes up. And then that noticing is a very human process. And so there's a kind of conversation with the material that takes a new form. There's always been conversations with ceramic, what it does as you're making, that complements what you do, or as you draw or make music with others. It takes a new form of generative AI. It's strange. It's not human. but there are still happy accidents there. And it takes a lot of tinkering to understand what those look like and how to take advantage of them without falling into the other pitfalls that AI has. And one other thing I want to talk about is I've been using the metaphor lately of AI as a vanilla man. So what I mean is, especially for idea generation, at first I thought maybe it's a straw man. It's something that can generate a weak idea and I can respond with a stronger one. But I realized it's not just that its ideas are weak, it's that they're bland. Generative AI broadly takes the entire internet and chews it up in a blender and spits out this kind of bland paste. And so by default, without a lot of steering, what you get from generative AI is very vanilla. Now, the image of a vanilla man that has race and gender bias encoded into it, that seems appropriate. That's what you get. And it's worth seeing it as with that image. Because what I think is useful about it is then you can look outside of it. And so I see the role of generative AI, especially for idea generation, as helping us see the negative space. So what it produces, this bland, vanilla, obvious output, is a starting point to say, like, what's outside of that? What's unique to me that I can bring to the conversation? Or what are some ideas that haven't been thought before or that are just unlikely to be produced in this statistical way that generative AI does? So that's, I think, another framing that I hope we can bring to kids, is to see the role of generative AI, including the process by which that content arrives, and how to see its role as a kind of like thing to push against, where your creativity can fill its negative space. Let's see. Any other questions that have popped up that we can address all together? We got a note about garbage in, garbage out with AI. Absolutely. It matters what you put into it, and especially it matters what the training data looks like. And we do need more transparency from the companies controlling it about what the training data is, as Karishma was alluding to.
I wanted to add something about Vanilla Man and garbage in and garbage out. There's some data that I was kind of working through, working with my students, and they kept coming up with this very clear way to describe the output. And they was like, yo, this is corny. And let me go ahead and let's just go ahead and have a real conversation now that we're here. We're friends now. And they were finding the outputs were just something that they did not want. So we spent a great deal of time talking about how, look, 17 inputs just to get some dark skin, but on some real conversation, the outputs were terrible. And I like this vanilla man kind of bland conversation because that's what the internet has turned into, right? We preference a segment of society and we almost did it to ourselves, right? And how I create this kind of parallel is Afrofuturism, right? So if you think about Afrofuturism and Black futurism, where looking at what a technological future looks like, but making sure to see the Pan-African cultural aesthetics work into how the visage and how it's presented, there's this authentic and textural feeling to it. But when you put in these discussions on what a future looks like in a generative software or even in a music software, if you're depending on what you're looking for, they come out with very bland, vanilla outputs that really don't provide service, particularly for young people that are looking to be creative. So I just wanted to say that corny came up multiple times in my data for what the output is. And it makes sense, right? Like the companies that are producing it, this is what they're giving you, as you said, vanilla man.
It's a really interesting thought to end on. Unfortunately, we are out of time. We could talk about so much more here. I really appreciate all of the panelist presentations. Thanks to our interpreters, and thanks for all the comments in the chat. I think we are about to close it down, but thanks again to everybody for all your thoughts. There's a lot more to explore here.